Welcome to our fourth class on David. Let's start off with a quick review. The last time we talked about letting God shape our worldview, our imagination, rather than the brutal Goliaths or the fearful Sauls we encounter. We need to learn to kneel, unhurried and calm, before our loving and powerful God. Now, what do you do when you see a baby? We coo, we make funny noises and act silly because babies are so lovable. Now, when did you realize that not everybody thought you were so lovable? For me, that happened when my little brother was born. All of a sudden, he got all the attention. Now, I had a choice on how to handle a rival, and I gotta admit, it was not with a ton of grace. How we handle rivals shapes our lives. The same happened to David. The main source of David's problem was Saul. We read in 1 Samuel 18 that David had just defeated Goliath, and he and Saul's army were on their way home. When the men were returning home after David had killed the Philistine, the women came out from all the towns of Israel to meet King Saul with singing and dancing, with joyful songs and with timbrels and lyres. As they danced, they sang, "Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands." Here's a ticker tape parade for Saul and his army, and the women were cheering loudest for David. Saul was not amused. Saul was very angry. This refrain displeased him greatly. They have credited David with tens of thousands, he thought, but me with only thousands. What more can he get but the kingdom? And from that time on, Saul kept a close eye on David. Saul started to see David as his rival rather than as a fellow soldier. Over the next two chapters, 1 Samuel 18 to 20, we watch as Saul went from irrational outbursts to coldly calculated assassination plots. Saul tried to kill David 6 different times. The next day, an evil spirit from God came forcefully on Saul while David was playing the lyre, as he usually did. Saul had a spear in his hand, and he hurled it, saying to himself, "I'll pin David to the wall." But David eluded him twice. Saul threw his spear at David 2 times. And then we read, Saul said to David, "Here is my older daughter Merab. I will give her to you in marriage. Only serve me bravely and fight the battles of the Lord." For Saul said to himself, "I will not raise a hand against him. Let the Philistines do that." Saul sends David into battle, hoping that the Philistines will kill him and do his dirty work for him. Then the 3rd time. Now Saul's daughter Michal was in love with David, and when they told Saul about it, he was pleased. "I will give her to him," he thought, "so that she may be a snare to him, and so that the hand of the Philistines may be against him." But David said, "Do you think it is a small matter to become the king's son-in-law?" Saul replied, "The king wants no other price for the bride than 100 Philistine foreskins to take revenge on his enemies." Saul's plan was to have David fall by the hand of the Philistines. Saul sends David to collect 100 foreskins in order to marry his daughter. Now, how do you get 100 foreskins from men who don't want to give them up? You need to kill them. You need to kill 100 men. By the way, David brought Saul 200 foreskins. The next attempt. But an evil spirit from the Lord came on Saul as he was sitting in his house with his spear in his hand. While David was playing the lyre, Saul tried to pin him to the wall with his spear, but David eluded him as Saul drove the spear into the wall. Here's the spear for the 3rd time. Saul's running out of imagination. Next attempt. Then Saul gave him his daughter Michal in marriage. Saul sent men to David's house to watch it and to kill him in the morning. Saul recruits hitmen to assassinate David on his wedding night. Nice guy, that Saul. Saul's become very short-sighted. He recognizes God is with David, but instead of deciding there's no point in fighting God, he actually fights harder. And all this time, David is trying to help Saul, playing music when Saul's mood threatened to overwhelm him. How do you feel when you're punished for doing something good? David asked the same question. We read in 1 Samuel chapter 20. Then David fled from Naioth at Ramah and went to Jonathan and asked, "What have I done? What is my crime? How have I wronged your father that he is trying to kill me?" We can all understand the hurt David feels because we've all felt the same thing. We've all been wronged at some time. Now enter Jonathan. In 1 Samuel chapter 18, we read, "After David had finished talking with Saul, Jonathan became one in spirit with David, and he loved him as himself. And Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as himself." Jonathan becomes David's best friend. At the same time, Saul is beginning to see David as a rival. We can't overestimate how important this is. Jonathan should have been the next king. He was the firstborn son of the current king. But apparently, Jonathan didn't feel the need to be the leader. Jonathan made a covenant of friendship with David. A covenant is similar to a treaty or a contract. It's a way of defining a relationship. We enter covenants today. Marriage is a covenant. It's a way of being in a relationship. Families are covenants. The fourth commandment, where we're to honor our father and mother, defines how to be in a relationship. The fourth commandment essentially says home is the place where they have to take you in. Covenants protect relationships. Then Jonathan went even farther. Jonathan took off the robe he was wearing and gave it to David, along with his tunic and even his sword, his bow, and his belt. Jonathan's covenant of friendship not only defines his relationship with David, it has also overtones of political loyalty to it. Jonathan's robe, his armor, sword are all signs of his claim to the throne, and he gave them all to David. He symbolically abdicated his claim to the throne. We see this covenant of Jonathan's friendship bracket Saul's attempts to assassinate David. Jonathan reminds David of their covenant 2 chapters later in 1 Samuel chapter 20. Jonathan said to David, "Go in peace, for we have sworn friendship with each other in the name of the Lord, saying, 'The Lord is witness between you and me, and between your descendants and my descendants forever.'" Jonathan's friendship helps contain and deal with the evil that David is facing. Friendship is an important part of our spirituality. Jonathan's friendship was essential to David's life. It would have been unlikely that David could have continued to serve Saul or survive all the assassination attempts without Jonathan's intervention. On the other hand, Jonathan's life is much more complicated because of his friendship with David. It caused a big strain in Jonathan's relationship with his own father, Saul. As we look at the friendship between David and Jonathan, it appears pretty one-sided. David seems to be clueless about relationships, now and later in life, as we will learn. Jonathan had little or no emotional reward from his relationship with David. Jonathan lived the rest of his life in Saul's court, which was a place that was hostile to him. We live our own lives in a culture that is often hostile to relationships. People sometimes scoff at the faithfulness that marriage asks of each of its partners. Families struggle to thrive in a culture that worships individualism. Work can devolve to being focused only on the bottom line. We must recognize that the relationship we have with a friend is one of the greatest things we can experience. Friends are willing to take the time to see the real person. Friends aren't superficial or calculating or making snap judgments about us or slotting us into some category. A friend isn't looking for someone to use. Instead, real friends are secure enough not to exploit our weaknesses or attack our strengths. They recognize how difficult it is to live out our inner convictions. They confirm our hopes and our dreams. I hope you all have a friend, and I hope that if you're married, you count your spouse as one. We need to understand the difference between the Sauls and the Jonathans of the world and concentrate on those people who build us up and not tear us down. Without Jonathan, David is at risk of either walking away from the work he was called to do, or he's at risk of developing a spirit of retaliation and revenge. It's hard to finish well in life, to start something good and then stick with it. Friends help us. They help us maintain that energy and the vision that we need to keep going. A friend encourages us to persevere, to continue, to find the energy, to keep the vision. And they cheer us on to do good work and to be a good person. Saul becomes increasingly hostile. But after each time he tries to hurt David, Saul becomes weaker and David becomes stronger. And Jonathan's friendship helps David stay the course. Evil doesn't diminish David because Jonathan's friendship entered David's life and helped protect him, to nurture him, and encourage him to become who God created David to be. You know, John Lennon was right. We can get by with a little help from our friends. So the important takeaways for today. We all need to learn how to deal with our rivals in a healthy way. Friendship is a very important part of our spirituality. And friends encourage us to persevere, to find the energy, to keep the vision. I'd encourage you to check out the discussion guide, which also includes study suggestions and other activities. Thanks for joining us. And until next time, keep the faith.